Hello and welcome to Top Story. When the president of a country with one of the staunchest secular traditions in Europe says that the school teacher can never replace the priest in the transmission of values and in teaching the difference between good and evil, people sit up and pay attention. No wonder then that the people of France are now listening closely to what the head of the Republic is saying about religion. And it's interesting. Last month, President Sarkozy told diplomats that the conditions of the return of the religious in most of our societies formed one of the most important challenges of the century. Opposition politicians have responded by warning that challenging secularism could open a Pandora's box of problems. More surprisingly, perhaps, their concerns are shared by some religious figures, among them Richard Prasquier, the head of the Representative Council of Jewish Institutions of France, who said on Wednesday that he was a resolute partisan of France's secular system. So is religion making a comeback, not just in France, but around the world, from Turkey to the United States? Joining us now to answer that question is Tom Hennigan, religious editor at Reuters. Tom, thanks very much for being on Top Story. It's an old debate, this one, isn't it? Where to draw the line between church and state. And would it be fair to say that Nicolas Sarkozy is trying to do that, to redraw that line?
Yes, he is trying to redraw that line. I think he thinks that the secular state has gone too far and it's offending people with religious sensibilities. And he's saying, why can't we move it a little bit away from that?
He's not saying change the whole system of lock, stock and barrel. He's not saying that this, we have to get rid of the laïcité or the secular system that they have in France.
No, not at all. In fact, he always says he will not change the 1905 law on laïcité, on the separation of church and state, but he'll change a few of the guidelines for applying it. So maybe then mosques can get subsidies to build, or maybe the Catholic universities, their theology degrees will be recognized by the state, which they're not now.
Isn't there a danger, particularly in a secular country like France, that he could stir up a real hornet's nest of opposition on something like this?
It's a very delicate subject, and you mentioned Prasquier. Also, for example, the Catholic bishops say they don't want any change in the 1905 law. They don't like one of his proposals to put religious representatives on the Economic and Social Council, which is an advisory body to the government. So there's even reluctance among religious leaders for this.
But among non-religious leaders, there must be concern, because, for instance, when President Sarkozy was in Saudi Arabia, he spoke to the Consultative Council, and he spoke there of a transcendent God who's in the thoughts and the heart of every man. Now, to the many millions of atheists, non-believers in France, that must have made strange listening.
Yes, yeah, and there was an uproar. There was quite a lot of criticism for that, especially that he said it in Saudi Arabia. So it's a new sort of speaking. He's breaking taboos, and a lot of people don't know how to deal with it. They don't find it appropriate.
But is that what he's trying to do, though? Just simply break the taboos, bring the debate out into the open, rather than saying this is what we need at the moment? He's just trying to make it a subject that people can debate about, frankly.
I think he wants to go further than that. I think Nicolas Sarkozy is the son of an immigrant, and he's fascinated by America. And I think one of the things that he looks at in America, he says, what is different in America? What makes it more dynamic? Because he wants to make France more dynamic. America's the big exception on the religion front. It's the most religious Western country by far. And he says things like, a person who believes is a person who hopes. And that's an idea, this dynamism, I think he wants to inject in the French society. I don't think it can be done that easily, but he wants to start the debate and see whether it can.
One of the problems for him, I suppose, in France, of all places, is the secular state in France was achieved in fierce opposition to the Catholic Church.
Right, and that's what gives it an almost aggressive nature sometimes, that you cannot show religious signs in school, for example. That's why the Muslim girls couldn't wear their headscarves. With that culture, with that tradition, it's very different from separation of church and state in America, where the whole idea is the state doesn't bother, it's sort of a free market of religions for everybody.
Now, we mentioned just a while ago Richard Prasquier of the Representative Council of Jewish Institutions of France, and he said that at the Council's annual dinner how much he valued France's secular system. Why do you think he said that? What is it? Why, for a man like that, why is the secular system so important?
The secular system is important because it gives everybody the same right. And before, under the old ways, the Catholic Church normally had much more say in things. This way, everybody, on paper and very often in practice, has the same right, but they cannot really speak about religion in the public sphere. So that's an advantage. He sees that, as do others. I mean, there are a lot of Muslims who will say, you know, we actually like this better than having any sort of society where there's a dominant Catholic part.
Well, coming towards the end of today's top story, I'd like to broaden it out a little bit beyond France. This isn't the only country in the world where religion is chipping away at the secular system. We've seen it in Turkey as well, the introduction of a new law making it legal to wear headscarves in universities. Is this part of a trend, you think, the return of religion to public life?
I think very much so. I think especially in Europe and North America, God never died in the rest of the world. But I think in several countries you see people standing up and saying this secularism, this individualism, also the consumerism has gone too far, and we're losing something essential, we're losing something spiritual. There must be something better than this. And so it's coming back. You see in Turkey, where they say they're loosening up some of the very strict secularism they had there. You see it in Archbishop Rowan Williams' speech about Sharia law. He was basically saying there the secular state is starting to really offend people with religious beliefs, and can't we have a few adjustments? And of course in America you see it in the presidential campaign now. The Democrats got religion. They started speaking more about religion this time around because the Republicans have been mobilizing the religious right for years.
United States is an extraordinary case, you know, because religion has almost never ceased to be part of politics. You know, you mentioned the Democrats, but on the Republican side, we had Mitt Romney, who's a preacher from the Mormon faith, and you know, it's considered almost a normal part of politics in the United States. Why do you think that is?
Because people feel free to talk about their beliefs, and in the States, since there never was an established church, there wasn't a battle against an established church like there was here in France. And so it's a normal part, but it's been used by the Republican Party as a vote bank recently.
And I'm afraid I'm going to have to interrupt you there. We've run out of time. That's all we have time for today. Thanks to our guest, Tom Hennigan of Reuters. Join us again next week for another edition of Top Story. Goodbye.